Hi, thanks for joining me. This is Angie, and today we're going to be making a baby quilt. I'm going to actually show you that baby quilt now. This is the one I just made. It measures 40 by 40, and I know that you can't see the entire thing on the camera. You will be able to see the picture on my website. So this is the top. It is nine blocks across and 9 blocks down. That measures 40 by 40. So we've got a total of 81 blocks. 40 of those are going to be white, and then 41 is going to be the pattern. And if you notice, I started with the darker at the top, and then as we get to the bottom, it gets lighter and lighter, so kind of that ombre look. Okay, so you have a couple options for this quilt. It is, like I said, a baby size, and you can use layer cakes or you can use fat quarters. What I'm going to be using is the leftover layer cake that I used for this one. The name of it will be on my website. It is one that's probably not available anymore. Fabric comes and goes really fast. It sells out like hotcakes. I will tell you I'm using the white Bella Solid Charm Pack. We'll need 40 of those. And then I'm going to cut my layer cakes to give me 41 squares that measure 5 by 5, same as this. So what I'm going to do is choose my layer cakes that I'm going to be using. You're going to need 6 patterns. So this right here with the castles, that is pattern 1. Or we can call that pattern 6 because that is the lighter of the color. So that's pattern 6. This would be pattern 5. This is pattern 4. And this is pattern 3. Pattern 2. And pattern 1. And if you look at these, you'll notice it gets darker and then goes to lighter, okay? Now you don't have to do this. You can position your squares wherever you want. I may change these up. I know that I had this pattern in the pink further down, and then when I got the quilt made, I was like, well, this is actually kind of dark instead of light. So you position them wherever you want. It's just you're gonna start with a pattern, and then every other one's going to be a white, okay? So there's going to be lots of pictures, so sometimes I mess up my wording, but the pictures will show what you need to do. So I have determined that you need 7 squares of all 6 of these. So if you cut this in half and cut this in half again, this is going to give you 4 because it measures 10 by 10, and we want 5-inch squares. So that's going to give me 4. So then I need to cut 1, and we're only going to use part of the second one. So because we need 41 squares, if you divide 41 by 6 patterns of fabric, you get 42. We only need 41. So one of these patterns, we're only going to need 6 instead of 7. So I'll recap all of that once we get going. So I'm going to go ahead and make my very first cut. Okay, so I'm just going to place this here on my what is this called, my mat, and I'm going to position it at the 5-inch mark. I want to make sure that my ruler, hopefully you can see this, that it lines up at the bottom down here, and that it lines up on the side. And then I'm just going to take my rotary cutter and cut. Then I'm going to turn it. Now I could turn this mat. It does turn. That's the beauty of using this one. But not everyone has this mat, so I'm just going to turn the fabric instead just to show everyone. Okay, so far I have 2. Now let me get this one. I'll show you a couple pieces of fabric, and then probably what I'll do is keep cutting with the camera rolling but I will fast forward it. So that gives me 4. Like I said, we need 7. If you were going to use a fat quarter, all you need to do is cut your fabric at the 5-inch mark and cut it 5 and 5 and 5 until you get your 7 pieces, okay? I need to bring this a little bit closer so I can see the lines. Okay, now we have 6. So I'm going to go ahead and cut. And what I will tell you is that if you want to have more dark or more light, you don't have to use 7 of all the patterns and then 6 of the final one. You could use 8, 8, 7, and then 3 6s. Which I know saying all that might be really confusing. And if it is, I'm sorry. I'll make sure that I have that combination also on my website. So if you wanted to use more of the lighter and less of the dark, you can do that. I really base my decision off of the fabric. So sometimes you have really pretty patterns of fabric, and then sometimes you have a few in there that you don't really care for. So you could definitely use less of the pattern that you don't like, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to keep cutting for a while, and then when I get to the next step, I'll resume, which might be in the next video. We'll see. Okay, so I have got all of my squares cut, and what I'm going to do now is position these on my design wall, and I'll show you the picture of that, or I'll film it, and then we're actually just going to start sewing. So this is one of those really simple quilts that you can make in just a few hours. I think the thing that takes the longest is probably pressing it. Okay, so I will be back. Hi, this is Angie, and I'm back with the second part of the baby quilt. I've placed all of my blocks on the design wall, and if you take a closer look, you can see the darker colors are on the top and the lighter colors are on the bottom, giving it that ombre look. Next, we're going to label the rows so that we can start sewing them. I've labeled each row starting with 1 and ending with 9, and I've also labeled every other row with the word up so that I'll remember to press the seams going up so that they nest nicely together. Okay, I've removed each row from the design wall. So here's row 1, here's row 2, here's row 3. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set aside all the rows except for 1. And what I want to do is make sure that the grain of fabric goes in the same direction on every single square. So if I pick up my block, you can hear that it's kind of a dull popping sound. If I turn it to the right, or actually turn to the left, you can hear it pop. Now normally I put this on the top, but because my fabric has things that I want facing up, I'm going to let me show you what I mean. In row 3, we have this fabric here. I would prefer to sew that so that it's going up and down and not sideways or upside down, although I did sew a couple upside down on my other quilt. But I'm going to try to get them all straight on this one. And even sometimes when I try, I still fail, but that's okay. That's the beauty of being handmade. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that if this popping sound is on the right and the left, because it's reverse, you know, then I want to make sure that all of them facing up have like that dull popping sound. So there's block 1, block 2, block 3. Maybe in a couple years I'll get the terminology right. So I already have all of these. I'll be honest and say I did this before I turned on the camera, but that's the loud pop, that's the dull pop. I am putting the dull pop at the top because I have fabric that's directional and I want it to be up and down and not sideways. Okay, so I've made sure that row 1 is all facing the same direction. I'll do the same thing to 2 through 9. Then what I'm going to do is take this stack to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew. Now you can, let me show you. I'm going to take my first block, take my second block, place them right sides together, line them up, and pin. So that's block 2 pinned to block 1, and then you can fold down block 2 and you can place right sides together, block 3, and pin. Now I'll be honest and say I normally pin a lot. I'm going to do the same thing for 4, but when it comes to these 5-inch squares, they don't move too much. So I probably won't pin the rest of them. I'll pin row 1 just to show you when I take it to the sewing machine. But after that, I'm probably just gonna wing it. If one of them starts to get crooked or whatever, I will just get my seam ripper out and start again. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Okay, so I'll finish this one and then we will go to the sewing machine. Okay, I'm on the very last one and I just wanted to make sure that I showed you all the way to the end. So what I'm going to do now is head over to the sewing machine and I'm going to show you how I'm going to sew these blocks together. So I'll be back. Okay, so we are at the sewing machine and I have got row 1 here all pinned and ready to sew. So what I'm going to do, try to make sure that I don't poke myself. I'm going to take that first pin out. I'm going to position it here on my sewing machine. We're going to be sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. And I do back stitch. Okay, so our first one is done. Now we're just going to slide down to the next square. So because I've pinned these are all ready to sew. On the second row, I'm not going to pin them, and then I'm just going to place them on my sewing machine. So I will sew through the first row, and then I'll show you what I mean on the second row. Okay, I have completely finished row 1. It's got my 1 on here. It's got the word up, meaning I'm going to sew, or I'm going to iron these seams up. Okay, so I'm going to grab the second row and I'm going to show you what I mean about not pinning. So here's row 2. What I'm going to do is just place my fabric right here, and I'm just going to flip it over just like that, placing them right sides together, and I'm just going to sew down that right side 1/4 inch seam just like when I pinned it. Because these squares are really small, they don't shift as much as some of the larger squares or blocks, so I feel comfortable not pinning. And you Okay, so I have row 1 and row 2 sewn together, and I think this is a pretty good stopping point for the next video. So what I'm going to do is sew all the rest of my rows, and then in our next video we will actually press our seams and then start sewing our rows together. Now that I've completed all 9 rows, I then took a piece of fabric and I wrote the word up. What this tells me is that I want to press my seams up on row 1. I'm going to press them down on row 2, and then every other row I'm going to press them up. So this is just an indicator for me. It's how I keep track, because I do get interrupted a lot, and it just helps to know which way to iron these so that my seams nest very nicely. So I'm going to show you that process. I'm going to start with row 1, and row 1 is up. So I'm going to go to the very last square in row 1, and I'm just going to press. And normally I have a much bigger working space, but on camera I don't, so I have to keep moving this. Okay, I'm going to show you row 1 and row 2, and then we'll pin it. Okay, so row 1 is pressed. Okay, I'm going to move that out of the way. I'm going to get row 2, and I'm going to fast forward. Now this is going to be pressed going down, okay? So this direction. But I'm still going to start on this end because for whatever reason, it's a little bit easier for me to start on the right side. I'm not sure why. I am finished with row 2, and if you'll notice, my little pin came out. That does happen occasionally. Not a big deal. Just make sure you keep on the lookout for those. Okay, so now what we're going to do is pin row 2 to row 1, and then we're going to sew it. So I'm taking row 2, turning it right sides facing together, and then I am going to pin them. Now if you're not a fan of pinning, that's okay. You don't have to. I still have trouble sometimes with my seams lining up, but now that we're nesting these, see, the back side's going that way and the front side's going that way, so that definitely helps with keeping your quilt with the seams lining up. So I started in the middle, and then I'm just going to work my way to the right, and hopefully I'm in the camera. Okay, so let me explain what I'm going to do, because I'm not going to film this part, okay? So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch seam all the way down to the very end. So after I get to the end, then I will press my seams. So that's attaching 1 and 2 together. Then what I'm going to do is take row 3 and row 4 and do the exact same thing that I've done with 1 and 2. I'll do the same thing for row 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and then 8 and 9. So then once I get all those pairs, then I'm going to, so let's pretend that these two have been sewn together. So then I would take row 3, even though it's already sewn to row 4, and I would place it right sides together with 2 and then attach it. And what I'll do is I'll actually come back to the camera in just a second and show you that, okay? Okay, so I have sewn together rows 1 and 2. See, here's 1, here's 2, and then rows 3 and 4. So I will continue with sewing my other rows together, like I said a couple minutes ago. So now what we want to do is press these seams. So what I'm going to do first is just kind of go over the seam, just kind of set it. Okay, then what I'm going to do is open it up. Okay, so I'm just going to fold that over just like that. It's nice to have an iron that gives you a lot of steam. Otherwise you would need to use starch. Okay, now I'm going to get the next one. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set the seam real quick. So now that we've got both of these pressed, this is 3 and 4, and here is 1 and 2. Okay, so I'm just going to turn 3 over, place it right sides together, and pin it, and then sew it. So I'm going to do the exact same thing to the rest of them, and then that's going to be our quilt. So I will pin this off screen, and I will be back. Okay, so I have sewn all the rows together, and now I'm just going to go ahead and remove our pins. I'm just going to save my up pieces of fabric so that I can use them again. Okay, so I've removed all the pins, and now what we're ready to do is trim all of our loose threads. So any threads that you see hanging out, you want to trim those off. Then what you want to do is press your seams flat. So I've not done that yet. That's my next step. I'm not going to do it on camera. You've seen me iron already. So I'll press those seams flat and give it a good starch before I take it to my long arm quilter. Now, what's next? I'm going to take this to my long arm quilter. She's going to finish it for me. So I need to determine my backing fabric, my binding fabric. She provides the batting, so I don't have to do that. But if you wanted to, if you had to buy your batting, it would measure the same as your backing fabric. So we're done. I'm going to send you over to my video that tells you how to prepare your quilt for the long arm quilter. So you'll be able to measure your quilt and determine how much backing and binding fabric you need. And have a great day. Thanks a lot. Bye.